Have you ever wondered how long it would take to beat Dark Souls 2 with fist weapons only? Well, now you can watch my pain and suffering using only the caestus. My name is Crazy Kylo, and I was challenged by a friend to beat the game using just fist weapons, and here's how my playthrough went. Starting out, I went ahead and named my character Punchy, since that's all we'll be doing this whole run, and then I proceeded by selecting the Knight class since this gives just enough stats to use my only weapon. The only issue though is you don't start with any fist weapons, so I was unable to damage anything since that would break the rules. I made my way to Majula, where I walked around collecting all the free items so I could have plenty of healing, and then I decided it was time to fight the first boss. I made my way to Hyde's Tower of Flame, where you encounter a boss in a rather small arena, which I was able to use to my advantage so I could beat the boss without breaking my rule. He did put up quite a good fight, as you can see, but now we had acquired some souls, which I can use to get some levels, and most importantly, use to buy an actual weapon. I made my way into Forest of Fallen Giants, where I quickly navigated my way through without being able to damage any enemy and bought the weapons I needed. I worked my way through the area to try to get some Titanite shards since the caestus is kinda weak at the base level. I came back to Majula, where I was able to upgrade both caestus to +2, and then came back for the last giant, and after getting stepped on a few times, I realized it was way easier to just punch him in the leg with my buffed caestus. With that boss down, I made my way to the Lost Bastille, where I encountered a strong enemy that was blocking my path. After going through this area, I was trying to get some items and encountered the first NPC of the game, the Forlorn, and I was realizing how much of an issue he was going to give me. I ran around to get some space, and just when I found out that backstabbing was how I could do the most damage to him, I turned around and watched myself die. With everything I had collected, I had enough to level up and get power stancing unlocked for the caestus, which allowed me to do 2 hits every time I used my left trigger. I then headed to Shaded Woods so I could buy some gold pine resin. That way my damage on one of my punches would be a little bit better, and then I also collected the Chloranthy Ring +1, which allowed me to regen stamina faster. I then left and made my way to the Huntsman's Copse, where I collected the first bone dust and came across a little surprise visitor while I was in the little hut. I then got to the skeleton fight, where after 3 minutes of running and hundreds of punches later, we showed the skeletons that the fist weapons are far superior in combat. I then continued to Harvest Valley, where I hit a small blockade. I need to open a gate which was guarded by 2 pyromancy chicks, and not being able to use range meant I had to run in there and hope that they don't blow me up. After a close call on the first pyro, who took out a lot of my health, I then just needed to hope that I could make it up the ladder and open the path. As soon as I got on the ladder, she froze in fear, and I closed the distance. With that open, I made my way to Jabba the Hutt, who got a couple of good hits in, and a last-ditch effort decided to flop around, but was unsuccessful. After that fight, I went back to Majula to upgrade my adaptability, because in this game, adaptability is tied to your iframes, which makes a certain boss, who we will see later on, much more difficult. With that, we headed back to Earthen Peak and made our way to a bonfire halfway up, where I unfortunately aggroed some enemies and ended up rolling off the edge for my second death. I then made sure to burn the windmill, because no one wants to fight the snake lady in poison while she heals off any damage that I could do. So with that destroyed, I walked into the fight. She got some good hits in with her spear, and even decided to try her luck by throwing her head at me, but in the end, the Fists of Fury were too much for her, and I took the win. I then ended up in the Iron Keep, where I decided it was time to face everyone's favorite boss, but ran into some issues along the way. I was eventually able to take out all the enemies one at a time, but when it came to the captain right before the fog wall, I got comboed by the bow and arrow guy, and he stunned me just long enough for the captain to kill me. With that death, I decided it was time to try a different path, so I made my way to the Sentinels. I dropped in, and to my surprise was able to kill the first Sentinel in record timing. I then had a little time to kill, where I just went to the edge and waited for the next challenger. I got a lot of punches on the second guy, and once I saw the last Sentinel wanted to join the fight, I jumped into the bigger arena. They must have been scared, because once I jumped down, they pulled out their shields to block all my attacks. I was able to quickly finish the second guy, and once I had the one-on-one, I was able to easily close out the fight. I then continued on and made my way to the center. I didn't bother lighting the arena, which can make for a tougher fight, but after getting plenty of punches in, even though he jumped back a lot to avoid my hits, I was able to take him out without an issue. I then bought the cat ring and made the descent into the gutter. After some navigating with the torch, I was able to get to the Black Gulch. I made my way through the area, and of course getting poisoned as well, and decided to pick up the closer bonfire since an NPC had invaded me. I went to light the bonfire and was awaiting my challenger. Oh, never mind, well anyways, I made my way into the rotten fight. Everything was going according to plan, other than the occasional hit that he got in because I missed a roll. But I did have a close call trying to heal and very briefly walking into fire, but even so, I took him down. With 2 primal bonfires left, I made my way back to the shaded woods, where we took on a scorpion and overwhelmed her with punches and took her out. I then continued on and decided that I could run past a lot of the enemies to get to the next boss faster. Yeah, I was wrong. I couldn't get the door in time. Eventually, I got past after one more death and entered the congregation fight. This was actually a harder fight than I thought because they kept healing and it was difficult to hit the enemies on the ground since, you know, fist weapons have no range. After somewhat of a struggle, I was finally able to kill all the enemies and proceed to the next area. On my way to the spider boss, I ran into another door I needed to open, which was a little challenging because I couldn't kill any of the spiders due to my limited range. So I ran around and luckily all the enemies got out of my way and I made my way to the big spider. I was able to confuse him with all my running by locking him into a loop of him shooting his laser and me running to the second head and punching it repeatedly. I did punch too hard and I ended up taking off one of his heads, and I had to close out the fight while he was freaking out about losing his head. Then it was finally time to go back to the Iron Keep. I tried the same strategy and got a baby jump, which resulted in me landing in lava, and then after a couple of attempts, I chose to run around the captain and just go straight into the smelter demon fight. The fight was going pretty well, other than the constant loss of health because he's a lava boss. He did make it a close fight by getting a well-timed jab when I was trying to heal, but he too was no match for the Fists of Fury. After that fight, I thought I could go ahead and run through the next area to get to the final boss of the Iron Keep, but I ran into some issues.
I'm dead. Now I'm dead.
About 4 different issues. But after learning from each death, I was able to make my way to the old Iron King. I had to give my respects because he used his fists for most of the fight. He had some good fighting techniques. He did get a good shot in at the end, but he failed to do enough damage, and then he sat and watched as I ended the fight. With the 4 primal bonfires lit, I was able to go to Draenleic Castle, where after what felt like 10 straight minutes of running, I got into the Dragon Rider fight. I think there were 2 bosses in there, but one went down in like 5 punches, so it felt more like a 1v1. I was able to strafe around to his back and expose his weak side. Then I continued through the castle, where I got to ride the longest elevator in the game. And then I was able to challenge the Mirror Knight. He must have thought that I wasn't going to be a challenge because he never used a shield or summoned an NPC to his side, but he underestimated me because while he was throwing lightning, I was throwing in a ton of punches. With him out of the way, that meant I was able to enter the best area of the game, you know, where there's waist deep water so you can't move at full speed and a shit ton of enemies that spam homing magic at you, as well as some lizard enemies that move insanely fast in the water. Yeah, I ended up dying a few times. I was eventually able to get to the 3rd bonfire of the area, which was honestly the hardest part of the challenge so far. After finally getting through this difficult area, I was ready for a great, challenging boss fight. Alright, I guess I'll settle for a frog. I just continually punched it in the face until he submitted defeat. With that, I had made my way to the crypt. I worked my way through the dark area until I met up with the King's Protector. It wasn't too bad of a fight other than half of my punches missing because this hitbox is great. I was eventually able to get the last few hits in that I needed so I could meet the king that he was protecting. And when I realized he didn't care, I took his ring and proceeded on. It was then time to go to Aldia's Keep, where I worked my way into a giant cage with a dragon that spent most of his time flying around in the air. So yeah, I got to watch him breathe fire for a good 5 minutes before I was able to damage him. When he did land on the ground and try to blow fire at me, that was my best opportunity as I was able to punch him in the neck and ended up being his downfall. I then made my way to what could be considered a more difficult area in the game. Wait, why is this ladder down? Never mind, I guess we can just skip the whole area, so that was lucky. I then realized once I was at Dragon Shrine that I had the King's Ring, so I decided to go beat the game. I didn't realize then that I needed the Giant's kinship before I could actually beat the game, so I was really just going in there to get the Watcher and Defender out of the way. They were quite the handful though. Every time I tried to attack, they worked in perfect harmony to stop me. This is where I had the most deaths of the run. Every time I tried to heal, they sprinted at me and of course interrupted or killed me. And then I had some unfortunate attempts where the edge of the arena got a little smaller and I may have fallen off.
No! I didn't know I was that close!
But after a few attempts and realizing that I could upgrade both my caestus to +10, I had a good strategy of taking down the Defender first and then full sending the Watcher so she couldn't revive. Then once I killed them, that's when I realized I couldn't beat the game yet, so I went back to Dragon Shrine and had a short conversation with an older dragon, and he gave the key to travel back in time. So that's what I did. I went back in time and fought a giant lord who didn't like getting punched in the ankles, but he was a little too slow and couldn't step on me in time. With that, I finally had what I needed to beat the game, so I went back to the castle and made the long journey to the throne room and took on Nishandra. I worked my way past her defense by rolling through floating curse things, so I wasn't constantly getting my health reduced, and then I just slowly withered her away with punches to show her that the best weapon in this game is the Fists of Fury, and that was my run. I was able to beat the game in a little under 4 hours and only died 23 times, even though most of those deaths were to the Watcher and Defender. I hope you enjoyed, and if you want to see more challenge runs, feel free to like and subscribe.